Very good. Just the camera, please, just the camera.
Thank you for being here. We will start soon, so please, if you can be seated. Right.
1 second.
If you could just put the Zoom on.
Ah, okay. Sorry. It's in the chat. Thank you. You can also try it from there. You have access.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for attending the EPSA's 12th annual reception on the topic of transforming health education, a European strategy. Our host, MEP Irena Joveva, will open this event with a keynote speech. Thank you very much for hosting this event for pharmaceutical students, and the floor is yours. Can you hear us on the Zoom?
She can't hear because you're muted. She can't hear.
I'm not muted.
Hi, you are not muted now. The last 5 seconds, so I didn't hear anything before that.
Okay,
I'm assuming that it's my turn.
Yes, exactly. I apologize.
Okay, I'm sorry, I cannot see anyone. I hear now a little bit, but I hope you can at least see me and hear me.
Yes, we're trying to fix this straight away. My apologies.
Okay. I heard a little bit. It has an echo, so I hope I understood well that I can start. So, dear guests and dear students, it is really my greatest pleasure to welcome you at this EPSA annual reception 2022. Even though, unfortunately, due to the reality we have been living in for the past 2 years, we couldn't manage to organize this year's reception in the European Parliament itself. Now I can see. Okay, great. So we couldn't manage to organize this event in the European Parliament, but I'm either way truly glad to see. Now I can see such a great number of participants here, there today, and I really hope you had a nice visit in the European Parliament this morning. So the theme focused on skills and education for transforming health education that you chose for today's reception is on point and very topical in the current times. It actually embodies the essence of the EU priorities for the youth sector as well as for the health sector. And the pandemic has shown a light on the importance and the improvement of the health sector. And for the last 2 years, at least, everyone has been, surrounded by discussions about public health. And even though we have been encompassed by the pandemic, we have not yet seen its true impact on society as a whole. However, the consequences of the corona crisis on youth and their well-being have already been recognized. And as a result of curfews, lockdowns, and closures, the youth has been severely impacted by the pandemic in several areas, such as employment, socioeconomic aspect, proper education, and also mental health. And in the latter, sharp increases in rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness have been observed by numerous studies done within the European Union. And mental health issues and social exclusion with which the young generations are more increasingly dealing with today can have severe and long-lasting impacts on their lives. And because it often happens that young people are forgotten, if I may say so, when a crisis emerges, the Commission actually decided to put them forward by naming this year the European Year of Youth. And as a part of that initiative, the Commission, in its communication, presented a new European strategy for universities. And that is extremely important because after the biggest global health crisis in a century, the well-being and prosperity of future generations will depend on sufficient education that will allow our society to be resilient and sustainable. And I believe that in the coming years, education, as we know it now, it will be transformed. And it will no longer solely focus on getting adequate knowledge, but it will also focus on new future-proof skills development in every profession. An excellent education, research, and innovation environments are an enabler for developing high-level skills, creating breakthrough knowledge, and translating it into practical applications. And the green and digital transitions require future-proof education, research, and innovation, and the significant disparities in digital skills across the EU must be overcome. Everyone needs to be equipped with the green and digital skills for the future and the innovation and technological potential we will be encountering. It will also be essential to create the grounds for professional reskilling and upskilling to meet new and emerging needs in society and the labor market. The pandemic also highlighted the much needed adjustments and upskilling in healthcare professionals. We are subjected to persisting and newly emerging challenges that threaten public health. For example, lack of effective health promotion and disease prevention, the rise of non-communicable diseases, increased cases of cancer, increase in mental illness, already mentioned, the spread of antimicrobial drug resistance, and the emergence of infectious disease epidemics, increased environmental pollution, and a lot others. So for mitigating these complex, interlinked actually challenges, it's essential to establish a plan for gaining needed skills that will allow healthcare workers to preserve and find multidisciplinary, cross-sectional and international solutions for emerging and persisting diseases. And the EU must create an environment to harness the combined skills of academics, practitioners, regulatory bodies, and industry, and foster their collaboration with health services, social services, patients, policymakers, and citizens in order to leverage public funding and ensure the uptake of results in clinical practice as well as in healthcare systems, taking into account the organization of health systems. So we took the first right steps into creating such spaces by laying the grounds for the European Health Union, which will actually strengthen preparedness for disease management, reinforce surveillance and improve much needed data reporting on a transnational level. And in addition, we also reinforce the European Medicines Agency mandate and established a new European Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority called HERA, which will not only serve as a warning center for potential upcoming health crises, but will also serve as a research and innovation support for the development of new medicines and to address market challenges and to boost industrial capacity, tackle challenges related to availability and distribution of medicines, and strengthen the knowledge and skills in all aspects of medical countermeasures in all member states. So these are just some of the initiatives and projects that the European Union is doing to mitigate the challenges in the healthcare sector. However, we do realize that all the challenges we are facing will probably not be solved in their entirety by the proposed initiatives. Nevertheless, we are taking the steps, I think, in the right direction, and I'm certain that more good initiatives will follow suit. Before I conclude, let me stress the importance of your chosen profession, because you, as pharmaceutical students, have chosen the profession that has played an essential role in mitigating the COVID pandemic. And without pharmacists, there would be no vaccine and no medicine to help us overcome various diseases, not only COVID. And you play an extremely important role in our society. I hope you realize that, because you do. And we, as policymakers, will do and have to do and will do everything in our power to create an environment in which you will strive. Although I could not be with you in person, I'm very sorry for that, but still I am truly honored to be able to at least address you like this today, and to be able to open your annual reception. And I really wish you a great event and a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, MEP Joveva, for these empowering words that I think will echo very much with the following discussions today. Now it is my turn to open this event, and I myself as well am honored on behalf of European pharmaceutical students to open this event dedicated to youth engagement, but also expert decision makers in the construction of the future of the European Health Union. First of all, I would also like to thank the speakers for taking their time for this exchange, as well as the students for their commitment and their presence today. Indeed, the world is undergoing several transitions with direct and indirect impacts in healthcare. The aging of the population calls for a new approach with healthcare's problems, and the environmental changes have been proven to negatively impact both the physical and the mental health of the population. It is up to the healthcare professionals to be part of these changes, having a positive impact towards them. Pharmacists are an integral part of the healthcare system, with an irreplaceable part as well, and have been proven to be more than capable to face it, as shown by the COVID-19 pandemic. The European dimension of health education is today undeniable. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need for European leadership in health and education, notably through continuous supply of pharmaceuticals, vaccination, organized crisis management, but also towards a green and digital transition. The particularities of the European Union makes it an exciting subject for health students who are committed to efficient, fair, and equitable access to care. But one may ask, does this make young people a legitimate party to speak out on European health issues? The answer is obvious. European citizens by nature, the European Union is structurally anchored in the values of students. It is therefore natural, but also essential for us to be involved. If in doubt, think about what would have been the crisis without pharmaceutical students in member states, but also in the European Union. The students have proved that they are strong and capable of taking responsibilities, and this immersion in the health systems, although anticipated by some, gave us the experience of professionals as well as the legitimacy that is now more than ever affirmed. As the next generation of the European health workforce, it is now our chance to act on the upskilling of the healthcare professionals through transforming health education. Now, I would like to introduce Andrzej Reich, the Director for Health System, Medical Products and Innovation in the European Commission, who wanted to address a word to the pharmaceutical students today. Please.
Good morning, or good afternoon for everybody. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. I am a medical doctor by training, but by chance I used to work a lot with pharmacists as a student, with many friends working together. We developed the program to work on herbal medicines and this time together, and then continue my interaction with pharmacists. Starting School of Public Health, is now creating the pharmacy inspection program in my school, and also special program for managers, hospital pharmacists. So I continue to see you pharmacists in my part as an important profession, and not only country I'm used to live and work in Poland, but also across Europe. You are a regulated profession. You are a profession which is under constant change and development. So my address will be about the way I see the profession, health profession. I think it's important to see our development in the context of bigger pictures and also challenges we are facing. So we start from the COVID pandemic, which brought us to the completely new world of addressing first the challenge of infection virus, but also number of other things. I will really focus on what's happened in the pharmacy. So first, I think it was very good news that in many countries the electronic prescription started to be available to patients, and many of them, thanks to this new developments, were able to get medicines in the pharmacy. The second big development in the pharmacies was change in number of countries' approach to allowing pharmacies to be part of the response to the COVID, including possibility to do the vaccination program in the pharmacies. It was very challenging decision for many countries, but it's happened. It'll be very interesting to see if it will continue as already started in many countries. With the seasonal flu vaccination shot, that we will continue also this approach in the future. The third challenge which you will face in the future is access to medicines. We have seen during last years the problem with growing number of medicines in shortage. Many of them they're used by patients. It's not only the small countries, small markets, but also big countries like France or Germany. So this really created new area of responsibility, because you patients like to get medicines. Often you should spend quite time to get this medicine to your patients. And during COVID, we have seen also the wave of, especially the beginning of COVID, because of number of communication and information, patients started, or citizens started to go to pharmacies and buy bigger volume of paracetamol or ibuprofen, just to be prepared for potential high fevers or infection. So, and then we're coming to the next point, which I think is important: communication. In the world of today, the communication is coming from everywhere. It's coming from what people hear from the family or from social media. It's coming from number of interaction when you go to the website. You can find the medicines, you can understand how medicine works. But finally, it's coming also to you, to pharmacists, and I think for me the critical role you play as a communication professional, because you are the one who can really help to understand the medicines or the treatment proposed by the doctor, and also see potentially also the problems of wrong interaction between different medicines. So the concept of pharmaceutical care or communication with patient is a very important one. We are reflecting also now in the new pilots we are developing together with the European medicine agencies, a number of national agencies to continue to push the digitalization of the difference between product informations. They are, for many very difficult to read all. So we'd like to modernize it, make them available also in digital platforms. But of course, there is also questions that we cannot forget that not all people have access to digital tools, or simply we don't have the digital skills to do it. So let's go now to the other corner of our debate today, a new debate about the future of education. I think we are now in the situation that first we have much bigger access to knowledge, and as I heard from medical students 3 years ago when we discussed this, they said, for us it's not a problem to get access to the source of knowledge, which was the problem for my generation, because sometimes it was difficult to get the books, they were very expensive, or simply they were not available. Now we have the source of knowledge quite widely developed through of course, through books, through e-books, through all kinds of digital speeches by super great scientists or professors from whole world. So the question is how we utilize the knowledge, but at the same time, how we make sure that we are not infected, if I may say, by wrong knowledge, because we also, from one hand, we have a lot of good stuff, but also we have quite a lot of this information, this communication. So I think it's important that in you thinking about your future education, one hand you have to learn how to get the right stuff, training to learn, and the second, how to select or preselect this rubbish things which are simply very poor quality or used as an easy information. The second important thing is that knowledge is changing. We are not anymore in the stable situation that we know everything about something, because the knowledge is changing much faster than used to be changed. So of course the question is about how you build your core curricula, but also how you are prepared to continue your professional development in the future. And then we're coming to the third area of development, which is how to do it. What is the best way of learning? Case studies, training programs on site, tutoring, all kinds of e-learning platforms. So this will be most probably a challenge for you to see the future education, because I think access to knowledge is critical, but how knowledge is served and how it's stabilized in our practice, it's other. And let me conclude about the challenges for us as a European Commission and European Union concerning the regulatory framework in pharmaceuticals. So we proposed in end of 2019 so-called was end of 2020, the first year of COVID pandemic. we proposed the so-called EU strategy, pharmaceutical strategy. The idea was that we should act as a Europe and develop a number of new initiatives, but also review our regulatory framework to make our legislation better, regulatory working better, and respond to the global challenges, scientific, innovative solutions, also to the way we see problem of the market today with accessibility of medicine. But even COVID showed us also global dimension when dependency on import to Europe was quite critical problem, especially at the beginning of this pandemic. So we are preparing a number of activities. We started a number of them already, but by end of 2022, we plan to propose a new regulatory framework, a revised regulatory framework in a number of medicinal products, including medicines for children and rare diseases. But this is the one area of development. Another important area is digitalization and data and access to health data. They are very critical, and we are preparing the new regulatory framework, but also infrastructure supporting this area, which is called European Health Data Space. And this will hopefully allow us first as patients or citizens to move our dossier across Europe, get the right quality of data, which of course pharmacists you have a big role also, make sure that data are available also concerning the medicinal treatment. At the same time, we would like to make sure that data, so-called secondary data, can be used for the research development, for the assessment of medicines, the health technology assessment, or other way help to help with the decisions for policy making. And finally, we would like to help to move digital services across telemedicine. It's a challenge. There are more and more solutions, and I think also there will be more ability of tele tools for pharmacists, especially in the area of advising and supporting patients. So, just conclude. Think about the lessons learned from the COVID pandemic. Make you thinking about education as wide as possible, open-minded. Don't believe everything is fixed. Everything is challenged today, and it should be open and everything. And lastly, let's think also about regulatory framework, which also help us also define new job, new future skills and expertise, and bring you closer to the patient, because you pharmacists, you are important health professionals. Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon.
Thank you very much to Mr. Andrzej for this also very empowering speech. The next keynote speech, is Mrs. Thermis Christophidou, the Directorate General for Education, Youth and Sports in the European
Dear
Commission.
friends, though
Who also wanted to address something to the pharmaceuticals. Thank you.
I cannot be there with you physically today. I wanted to send you all a word of encouragement. But first of all, I want us to take a moment to think about the war in Ukraine. I know that you feel with the Ukrainian people as much as I do, and in particular with the Ukrainian young people. Instead of enjoying their lives, learning, working, and spending time with loved ones, they're literally fighting for their survival. We all demand that this attack stops immediately. Now back to the topic of today. The last 2 years have been challenging for all of us, but especially for everyone working in healthcare. The pandemic demanded a great deal of strength and resilience on your part. You had to adapt to having restricted mobility opportunities. You could not meet your fellow students or colleagues physically. You adapted to distance and blended learning to new and difficult working conditions. Many of you may have felt isolated, struggling with a fast-paced, fast-shifting reality. But you faced these challenges and showcased admirable resilience in embracing new ways. Never have we seen so much digital technology in the classroom, in schools and universities. Indeed, more and more institutions are adopting a challenge-based approach. I know this transition was not seamless. It had a cost. It meant a great deal of effort and dedication from both teachers and students. It came with the anxiety of facing an entirely new situation. I firmly believe that these sacrifices were not in vain. We are adapting our education systems so that learners can focus on learning and people like you can reach the labor force as soon as possible. First, we have a European strategy for universities, a new one. This strategy brings together 35 years of Erasmus Plus program, more than 20 years of the Bologna process, and the experience of the European Universities Initiative. With this strategy, we help universities to work together and marshal resources to address difficult challenges of our times. Second, we are further expanding the European Universities Initiative. The initiative offers good practices to help making sure all learners get the competences they need for the future. And third, we have developed the European approach to micro-credentials. This is something that may come very useful to you later in life. It allows you to have more flexibility when you reskill and upskill to match the fast pace of changing society. And fourth, we have the Digital Education Action Plan. This plan was adopted about a year ago, so it already incorporates many lessons learned from the pandemic. It aims to help institutions offer inclusive, effective, high-quality digital education. And it aims to boost digital skills so that people can continue learning throughout life and make use of new technologies. All these initiatives have been constructed based on your experiences and challenges, and they are meant to benefit you. We want to strengthen your skills, make sure you can study abroad, and have your academic record recognized no matter where you go next. Dear friends, thank you for persevering through these difficult times. And please know and be sure that we're working hard to make your future a better one. I wish you all the best in your studies and in your prospective careers. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mrs. Christophidou for this speech with the initiatives which will be discussed in the second panel discussion. Next, we have Josef, the EPSA president, who will do a short presentation about EPSA and students.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I briefly will present EPSA to you, although I believe it's not very necessary. I'll wait for my slides. EPSA's history started over 40 years ago, and actually at the beginning, pharmaceutical students' education was the core, as it is still now at the beginning. So really the education is something that we are striving to over the times, and it's really nice to look back at what the students seen important and what they wanted to achieve. And it's very interesting to see that the topics that they've been bringing forward are still relevant at the moment. And because EPSA always try to make the education of pharmaceutical students better, we try to be at the forefront of these changes and actively advocate for students' well-being and their studies. And that's why in 2013 we started to be based in Brussels to really be hands-on with the advocacy and policy initiatives and make the change that we want to see. And now we're standing here in 2022 with the topic of today AR, and we are still fighting for pharmaceutical students' education to make it better. But moving on, this wouldn't be possible.
I'm not doing it, he's doing it.
No.
Yeah,
Yes.
you can.
Yes. So this wouldn't be possible without the background of member associations and over 100,000 pharmaceutical students that we are representing, and we are trying to really be the voice of them in Europe. And moving on to the EPSA's mission. So we are really trying to actively engage the students, but also the professionals, and connect them so they both can learn from each other and bring the future together in the pharmacy field, in education, but in healthcare in general as well. The association is governed by the General Assembly, and in between the General Assemblies is the EPSA executive and the rest of the team that are really putting forward the work to make students happy, basically, and bring forward many different projects, which I will be speaking about now. So as I said at the beginning, education for EPSA is really the core and really important. And we are trying to bring to students many opportunities through various options. One of which are the EPSA events. We have 4 events over the course of the year. One being the annual reception that we are here now, and the other ones being annual congress, autumn assembly, and summer university. Each of the events has a bit different focus, but at all of them, the education of students and bringing them extra knowledge and experience is the heart of all of these events. As I said at the beginning, EPSA has a very long history, and there are many people who got us here, to stand in front of all of you, and we are very grateful for their work. So we wouldn't be here with our alumni network that are still helping us up to this day. And moving to education, we have several projects, with methodology booklet being one of the most important when it comes to how pharmacy is taught around Europe. Then we have LEAP, which is the lifelong learning platform. Pharmaceutical students or pharmacists, as any healthcare professionals, has to always be on the edge with all the developments. So it's important to start young with being lifelong learner. We are also trying to bring the knowledge to other pharmaceutical students, but also the public through our public health campaigns. And we are developing the students' soft skills through the EPSA training project. Pharmaceutical field is very based on science, so we are also focusing a lot on the development of students in this field through various projects that you can see on this slide. Moving on to how we are presenting ourselves externally, we have the EPSA newsletter and EPSA activity booklet. You can get the activity booklet, I think, today. It's very fresh, just released a few days ago. So if you want to see what EPSA does throughout the year, it's a good publication to get the idea of what we are really doing. And of course, you can find us on our website or through our monthly newsletter to students, which is called the Monthly Dose. Some of the social media handles, if you want, you can take a picture and start following us. We are trying to really engage through various projects that I already presented. So it's always good to keep up with what we are trying to bring to the students. Another important thing, as it was already mentioned in one of the keynote speeches, is students' mobility, with Erasmus Plus being the European initiative. We are also trying to bring something extra to these opportunities, and our staple mobility project is the TWINET, which brings two countries together for a week-long exchange when they can see how pharmacy is looking in different countries, and also exchange the cultural awareness and sometimes create friendships for life. With education, it's also connected the professional development of students, and we are trying to bring them the knowledge how to be the professionals they want to be. If I would pinpoint one of the projects on this slide, it's the mentoring project, which is an amazing opportunity for around 50 students each year to be paired with a mentor, a professional from different fields of pharmacy, and get really hands-on experience and guidance towards the field that they would like to start their career in. I don't really need to be talking about EPSA advocacy because that's why we are here, but we have quite interesting track record of various positions with the latest one, except for from the white paper that's basically released today. It's the mental health survey, because mental health is a really important topic for EPSA and the mental health of pharmaceutical students. The next one being the mobility, already mentioned previously. And it's always nice to see recognition of our work. For example, in 2017, the European Commission recognized our work in the space of the health NGOs, and we've been awarded with the 3rd. Last but not least are our partners, without who we couldn't be really here, that are helping us to develop EPSA even further. One of them being the internship providers for our Brussels-based interns. This is the FPR, PGUN Vaccines Europe. We are very grateful for hosting our interns there and helping them to get a taste of the Brussels bubble and the pharmaceutical field. Then we have various external collaborations that are bringing us speakers, but also keeping us with the latest developments, and we are very grateful for their help. Of course, we are not the only students association around, and we are in good collaboration with all of these, most of them being healthcare students associations. And lastly, we have several partners that are helping us to develop EPSA projects and activities. And once again, we are very grateful for all the help and support. And yes, that is it from my presentation. Thank you very much. I hope you will enjoy the annual reception. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion later on, and I'm hoping that I will hear a lot of the questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we will be able to move on to our first roundtable on the topic of future skills. While we try to fit the hybrid system, I will invite our speakers here. So I will start by Isabelle Clamou, who is a policy officer for medical countermeasures at HERA. Our second speaker will be Mara Pereira, who is Train for Health Project Coordinator. Our third speaker here with us today is Vladius, who is EHMA Executive Director. You see, he has not arrived yet, but he should not be. He should be here in a few minutes. And finally, we have Andrzej, EPSA Vice President of Education. And joining us online, we have Katarzyna Ptak, who is Policy Officer for Can you hear me? Yeah. National Health Systems in SANTE. Mrs. Ptak, can you hear us well? We are not able to hear you from our side. No, still not. We still can't hear you. It seems like from our side the system seems to be working. You are muted. Oh, can you speak? No, still not. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. No, still not. But if you have access to earphones close to you, maybe it might help. through your phone, if you'd like. In the meantime, we will start the panel, and our assistants will see if we can get Mrs. Ptak to connect with us. My apologies for the delay. As mentioned by the keynote speakers, both health and education are undergoing significant changes. First, with the introduction of new services that have been seen during the COVID-19 in pharmacies, but also the development of science and the upcoming regulatory changes in the European Union. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted our health systems, as we have seen, and it has implied a lot of changes in the legislative framework. First, with the change of mandate of the EMA, the ECDC, but also with the pharmaceutical strategy that was recently adopted. Isabelle Clamou, first I will ask you, in time of crisis, what have been the challenging areas reflecting the necessity of upskilling pharmacists and healthcare professionals, and how do you believe these legislative changes have helped the healthcare professionals prepare the crisis?
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you to EPSA, for inviting me. This is a topic very close to my heart, being a pharmacist by education, so I'm very pleased to be here today. One of the key issues we faced during the crisis was communication, let's face it. So many of you, and probably your elder colleagues in the pharmacy, faced many questions on safety measures, why wearing masks, is it efficient, yes or no, scientific questions, what about mRNA vaccines, mechanism of action, adenovirus vaccines, are they safe or not? You had also questions with respect to regulatory. Can we approve a product with limited data package? And they expect pharmacists and students, or even your family, your relatives, to answer those questions. Because you become highly qualified professionals in the matter of health sector. And in this respect, the learning of the crisis that they should be at disposal, but also part of your course, of your courses, some basic knowledge about crisis, health crisis, what is the legal context, how a public health emergency is declared. So one of the reasons, for instance, in terms of legislative changes, we have the upcoming HERA regulation, which was referred to earlier by Honourable MEP, and this will enhance the power of the EU in times of crisis. So what's the legal context? Who has responsibility for what? Between the global level with WHO, the national level, the European level. Because you need to understand as future healthcare professionals what's the context so that you can understand and explain the measures which are taken and how the decisions are made. So that's absolutely key. And for these courses was explaining in the case of crisis, the sociological aspect, because we talked about vaccination programs, how a government is making a decision. Sometimes you are under the impression that it was the latest decision at the corner of the table which has been made. And for this, you need to be able to understand that. So we're going to face more crises, let's face it. And whether it's because of AMR or maybe for other reasons, we're going to face it. So a module or part of your core courses about healthcare crisis, so that you can contextualize and explain. But also, I was pleased to see the EPSA website or platform. One could envisage a lay language, basic explanation about certain measures which can be available to you as students, but also for future healthcare professionals once you are fully engaged in your professional life. The second aspect is that the crisis revealed dependency in terms of medical countermeasures. So beyond medicinal product, we talked a lot about the PPEs, the ventilators, and so on. So whether in the hospital, but it also affected the industrial supply chain. We've been facing dependencies. That's something also HERA is going to work on, but it's also important for you as healthcare professionals to understand it. You may not go in industry in the course of career you're going to choose, but still, understanding what's the manufacturing process, how it's good to know, okay, there is an API, there is an excipient, there is a tablet, there is a syringe, but understanding a high level, general understanding how a biological product is manufactured compared to a generic, compared to biotech, is really important so that again, you can explain, but you have the understanding and also about the alternatives. So if you need an alternative for an IV or an infusion and you need to understand which doses and why not these doses, I mean, this is also useful for you. So a general understanding about this, the supply chain is to us, I mean, one of the learning, and we're going to build a database in HERA about the understanding of the supply chain of products from really the API up to the finished product. So that's, I mean, you will see in your, I mean, you have all of you those boxes of medicines, and there's a 2D barcode on it. But very few probably know what is the 2D barcode for, why it has been put. It's been put for fighting against falsified medicines. But we can imagine that in the future crisis, by scanning this code, you can print out the leaflet with the latest safety information, with instructions of use to enhance the observance of the treatment by your patients. So this all is also critical. And lastly, I think that's the point that Andrzej referred to as digitalization, so, or numerical, whatever you call it. So as you know, the vaccines have been developed, the COVID-19 vaccines have been developed in a record time, in a matter of months, rather than years, which usually take for medicinal product. It had put at the utmost, I mean, really all the possible processes for scientific research by using AI, by modelization from immunogenicity studies to apply to humans, and so on and so forth. We used also remote computer validation for inspections. So the digitalization skills and how they can apply is also key as part of the education. So these were, I think, the three elements that we've seen increased skills of scaling skills of pharmacists would be absolutely essential. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Clamou. And it is true that we see a lot of gaps in training, and also in most European countries, the training in industrial pharmacy and the whole industrial process of manufacturing drugs is very different from a country to another, and shows a lot of gaps. Now turning to you, Jean-Baptiste, as the president of the European Health Management Association, you have studied the profiling of future healthcare workers' needs and improving their core competencies in light of anticipated future healthcare needs. My question to you now is, considering recent events, do you believe we are slowly moving towards a European strategy for effective and sustainable healthcare workforce, fostering the healthcare workforce core competences, but also encouraging EU member states to collaborate towards a common goal?
Just to make it more interesting, I probably should have interrupted you to say I've just come from another meeting and I've walked very quickly, and I'm type 1 diabetic and I can't remember my name now. My blood glucose has plummeted and I'm waiting for someone to bring me a drink. So I won't be able to respond until I've restored my glucose to an acceptable level. I apologize for that and the disclosure, but could we go to someone else and come to me next?
Of course, thank you very much. Well, considering we are slowly moving towards a European strategy for an effective, sustainable healthcare workforce, I will ask you, Margera, as the Train for Health project coordinator, what do you believe are some necessary changes in the educational framework in order to allow such outcomes?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much.
So hello, good afternoon, and thank you, Chloe. I'm delighted to be here. I have to say it's so good to resume the face-to-face events that I guess we're all missing. So answering your question, Chloe, I think your question was about what changes do we need in terms of education to make sure that healthcare professionals have the right skills. And yes, I'm here in the capacity of a project coordinator. It's an Erasmus Plus project, and I'm going to focus on 3 points really. First of all, let us look at the context and let us look at the needs of the persons that we serve. So if we look at the context, we're all familiar with these. We have aging, we have an increasing prevalence of chronic disease. We have a trend towards the empowerment of persons that live with chronic disease, and this makes perfect sense from many perspectives, including the perspective of sustainability of the health systems. We also have other trends, or perhaps reality today even, which is the shortage of healthcare professionals and the increasing expenditure with health that really poses a threat to the sustainability of health systems. So this is a bit of the context that we are all aware of. And then we have the needs of the persons that we serve as health professionals. So it's a matter of thinking what are the right skills for the needs of the persons and for the context, and how should education be shaped to address, well, the needs and context. And first of all, I think in terms of curricula, it's about backward design. So it's about thinking what are the competencies that we need, and then you work backwards and you start developing the curricula and the learning outcomes and the learning activities and the assessment just based on the competencies you want to achieve. And there are plenty of competency frameworks out there. It's really a matter of pulling them together, see the common areas, instead of reinventing the wheel. Then a second area I would like to focus in terms of changes we need in education is interprofessional education. And I'm talking about interprofessional education in the way that is defined by WHO, so learning with and from each other. So it's not about having content that is developed by several professionals or several disciplines. Yes, that's a starting point, but it's more than that. And I have to say, we still work very much in silos. So as a pharmacy student many years ago, I never had any training whatsoever with colleagues from medicine or nursing or other disciplines in health. And 20 years have elapsed, and we're still in that context. So we haven't really moved forward. And I think it's something we need to address as a priority. And this goes really hand to hand with the competencies I was talking about, because many competencies that are needed nowadays for healthcare professionals are really interprofessional. So if you think of something that is very close to my heart, such as supporting behavior change in persons that live with chronic disease, it's everybody's job. So it's not pharmacists' job only, it's the job of physicians, of nurses, of psychologists, and so many other professionals. So just to recap, in terms of what we need to change, we need, as I see it, we need to look at competencies and develop the curriculum just based on that, and not on what we know or what we think it makes sense, but on what we need to achieve. Then we need to go more interprofessional. And then a third and last aspect, which is digitalization. Of course, everyone is talking digital nowadays, and I would like to perhaps reflect on the fact that we need to enhance teaching and learning with digitalization and not to replace teachers. Because I think, especially with COVID, everyone now agrees that in-person contact is so important, but at the same time, just using the electronic means to to enhance teaching and learning and to give more flexibility and to meet the needs of different learners, because we all have different needs. And to wrap it up, if you think of these 3 points I mentioned, we need a policy push. Because as much as we always need individuals that are motivated to make changes, and those individuals are students, as yourselves, our academic educators, our leaders, but if we want to promote change at a wider scale, we really need to have a policy push. So I think I've covered everything I wanted. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Mara. I think what you're saying is particularly interesting for pharmacists, since we're not directly in contact with patients most of the time. So if we don't have interprofessionalism in our practice, our knowledge sometimes just doesn't get to the patients. Thank you very much. Now moving to Andrea. Andrea, as a student representative, how are pharmaceutical students' views and opinion on the framework of their studies matching with those that Mara just discussed right now, so of the teaching bodies such as Train for Help?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you so much. I think we basically agree as students with most of the things pointed out beforehand. And I would like to stop on the interprofessional education part, because actually Mara and I were discussing about it a bit earlier, as in the context of, for example, patients living with chronic diseases, and how the part of behavior changes is not really part of our pharmaceutical curricula when it actually should be. As for example, in patients having chronic heart diseases, we are not the ones actually prescribing the medicine as pharmacists. Of course, we have to know lots about how medicines work, but we could support even better the patient with the behavior changes and giving advice on changes that they could actually implement besides the medicine that they can take, which can really, really improve their path, disease path, not in a bad way, I mean. And we are also advocating as pharmaceutical students for improvements in the curricula that are needed at European level to reflect the advancements of science and technology, and to provide us with the right skills, hard and soft skills that we need when we finish our studies. And for this, we agree that collaboration between educators and students is definitely needed. We realized, we did a survey in EPSA last year amongst our students, and 98% of them actually agreed that student representatives should be involved in the decision-making process when it comes to the pharmaceutical curricula, either by voting alongside educators or by at least offering opinions or raising concerns or giving suggestions on what can be changed, both in the content of the curricula but also on the tools that can be used for teaching. And this is why, of course, educators are the ones that actually know what is the knowledge the students need when they graduate. But students are the ones having the direct impact with the teaching process, and they can assess better what works for them and what doesn't work for them, what can be done better, so they could acquire the hard and soft skills they need when they graduate. And we believe that the collaboration between students and educators will allow the advancement of a student-centered curricula that would improve the knowledge transfer process from teachers to students, and would facilitate also the inclusion of innovative teaching methods and tools. As you all know, communication mainly has two sides, and when one of the sides, which in this situation is the students, doesn't receive the message properly, then it means that something has to be done on the way the message is sent. And for example, one of the survey respondents answered that in Switzerland, students are actually involved in the decision-making process of pharmaceutical curricula, and it was very efficient. And another one said that in Ireland there is a national student engagement program where students are actually trained to become quality assurance reviewers, and then later on they are included in the quality assurance review of for higher education, so the curricula and how teaching is done. And we believe that in order to future-proof the skills, we also need to future-proof the learning. And for this, a proper setting is also needed. And 92% of the students that answered to the survey I mentioned earlier actually thought that the active learning concept in pharmaceutical studies is necessary, and it would be very, very beneficial for students, because such an environment would stimulate the critical learning skills and will also facilitate problem-based learning and open discussions. And for example, simple examples of how this can be done, again based on the survey, was through real-life pharmacy simulations or debates or case studies or even e-learning based scenarios. And I would like, my last point is focus on the digital skills that all the speakers before me actually pointed out that they are very important nowadays. Students also agree with this, especially during their lectures and seminars. They would really like to have more digital tools being used, either in the form of videos or interactive quizzes that would enhance gamification and to make everything more interesting and easier for them to learn and to remember. And over 70% or 75% of them believe that educators should actually encourage students to use their electronic devices also for research and learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And well, you made the transition a lot easier because you touched upon both the importance of case studies in education and also the heterogeneity between countries we have in education, which also, I believe, can help evolve our practices, and also the importance of digital skills. So now I will turn to you. Yes, so my question to you is, what have you learned when looking at case studies and good practices on the workforce planning about innovation readiness and digital health?
Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me, and I apologise for my entrance. But I do hope you enjoy my performance of living with a chronic illness while people talk about a chronic illness. And I think that obviously that's given me a perspective in how I look at healthcare, and you might find me reflecting on that. I don't normally make it quite this personal, but I think what's interesting about our topic at hand is, medicine is personal. And what I've learned is that when we're talking about people, and especially when we talk about chronic conditions, we're talking about people who are customers for life and who have expertise far beyond what we would develop professionally. So really what we've learned then is how you your communication skills, how you listen to people, how you engage with non-clinical skills are vital for all professions and in the healthcare industry. And unless we're having the professions really understanding people, communicating effectively, and you'll be dealing with people even as new graduates or even when you're really advancing your career, who have a lifetime of experience with a condition that you won't be able to match in their way, but you will add a new dimension. So on that note, I also just want to acknowledge, I think it's exciting to be in your position, as pharmacy students, where we're talking here about, what is the title exactly? It's the future of health education. And if you're wanting to revitalise it, don't listen to us. Like, that's maybe part of my advice, is come with your freshness and your newness and pave the way. The bit where you might want to listen to us is the expertise on this panel. And I must say, what I've been hearing, I just was saying, yeah, that's what I was going to say too. So in a way, I'm done. But in another way, I'll add a few things about what I've learned. And I'm going to mention the projects. And because I'm still just coming back to sanity, I'm going to have to read from my notes about the projects so I can get them right. And okay, so we've had a couple of different projects that we've been running. And things that we've been observing. So I want to talk about the DISH project. So the DISH project is on digital innovation skills to helix in health. And so this was a project that had some implementation funded by the European Commission, and it was really implementing different projects in different areas across Europe to test out in practice how you implement digital learning. That's one thing that we did. We did another project called iRaise, which was about upskilling professionals for a more efficient, innovative adoption in health systems. So this is stuff really looking at how do you actually adopt things, and when they're actually being rolled out, how do they work? Because once you're in the job, that's my mind. Yeah, Okay. Once you're in the job, like days like we probably all on the panel had is have you all come from like back-to-back meetings and had to run here and then you've got another meeting to get to? When you're living like that, how do you implement training? And so what we've learned about that is how do the professions want to access training? And we're learning just as you think you know what you're doing, then you have a crisis. It might be COVID, something else will never come along. And then everything you've done to plan to make this training happen gets interrupted by a global pandemic or a local crisis. And so agility and flexibility are fundamental. I really appreciate the display lighting that's happening in the background. I feel like we're building mood for what I'm saying. I hope that's helping people listen more. I can imagine you've had a long day. What else have I learned?
Mrs. Ptak, can you maybe hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Mrs. Ptak?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, yeah, it's cool, but I'm connected from the
Our apologies for this technical issue again.
Okay, let me just summarize a few key points. So the first thing is the health workforce planners have to estimate the future. So
I'm also following the conference, but I think the sound has gone off from the room.
Oh no, we hear you. This is not the speech at all from the start to now that I have expected.
Yes, but if it's possible to cover this, I can hear you.
That's right, me too.
Our apologies to the speaker for this.
No, it's great. It actually helped me. Let me leave you with 2 points. You need to estimate the future. So when you're looking at learning needs, you have to estimate the future. We're building learning, we're building curriculum for a future that we're not clear about. So we need to be agile and we need to be able to imagine the future and then be agile to adapt to when we get things wrong.
I hope you can hear me because
Yeah, is it possible to cut the sound, please? Thank you.
Okay. So estimating the future and being agile. There's that message. And the last one that I'll give you is we need to reimagine the relationship between professionals and patients. I talked at the start about communication being a core skill for clinical and non-clinical workers. And I'm thinking what you feel, and I'd really love to hear from you later. You can find me on social media, I'll be around later if you want to talk to me about we have to change the dynamic between patients, the professionals, management, in order to bring about the reforms, the resilience, and the reimagination of the health system that can continue to meet the needs of citizens. So those would be my probably 2 key messages.
Yes, thank you very much. And this is something that is fairly important also talking about crisis awareness. Mrs. Isabelle Clamou, we see that crisis fosters change, as seen in European history. So my question is, how are these changes, as mentioned before by Josef, how is skills now taken into account when building into preparedness of future crises?
Thank you. Well, actually, I think previous speakers summarized it very well. Building curricula for the future we don't know yet. So one of the bases for the creation of HERA is that we're not only looking at infectious diseases like COVID, we're also looking at so-called CBRN, chemical, bioterrorist, environmental, radionuclear. And any of these crises will trigger a health threat, will have a health impact, no doubt about it. Think climate change. Climate change, you see more pollution, you will see more maybe new diseases coming up. We see movement of refugees, as we see now from the war in Ukraine. So you can see new pathogens, also new variants coming. So in any case, there will be a health component. And in this respect, it means that we have also to be prepared for new medical countermeasures, new tests, also new diagnostics. So you have a range of medical countermeasures which have to be developed and to be adapted. And for this, what do we need? We need gathering intelligence and analysis, which is really the key of our work in HERA in the coming years. We didn't see COVID coming. We didn't know it. Even the US didn't know it. So this is where, you heard about all the media screening with keywords and so on. We need that for health. So which means that we need new thinking, but we need new skills to get the understanding and be able to analyze and to have risk management skills. And what is about the educations regarding your curricula, then looking at what are the future threats to health, what are the future threats which will have a health impact, so that you can also anticipate or have already some ideas of what's up and coming, so that you can also anticipate the cure and your role as healthcare professionals in those threats. So probably in part of the curricula could envisage this. And well, that's the thing. At this stage we are thinking of, but it is predicting the unpredictable still. But the risk management approach, the way to approach it, I think Nicole said it very well. Your curricula is still very much about the medicine. It's still about a pharmaceutical product. Although with the evolution, and even the legislative framework showed that legislation was about the legislation on pharmaceutical product. It moved into how the medicines is part of the public health. And we talk about healthcare professionals, but a different role than simply being at the desk or prescribing or giving medicines is your role in accompanying the patient in chronic diseases is one, but there is much more than that. People are coming to, in some cases, come to you with their mushrooms that they pick up over the weekend and ask you, okay, am I going to die if I take one of them? So you are the first public health safeguard, by all means, and you will be all your career and all your life somehow. So hence, the curricula envisage that, okay, for not the mushrooms, I think we had enough for so many years. But yes, that's a bit what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to go back to speaking about digital skills, and since we're making the event a bit more personal today, I was at an event a few days ago about digital skills, and it was mentioned unanimously by all speakers that they think that the digital skills and digital transition should be led by the European Union, and I was very surprised about this, but this question for me also applies to healthcare skills in general, and as we see today, the need for upskilling and therefore upgrading healthcare education. So my question would be to Mrs. Ptak. Is it possible? Yes, perfect. So considering the limits and the competences of the European Union in the field, how do you think the European Commission will be taking part in attending the needs of the member states in terms of skills, and also taking into account every specificities in terms of health systems?
Thank you very much, Claude, for that question, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. I'm very sorry about the problems with the connection. Yeah, it's a very valid question indeed, thinking of the share of competences for both education policy, but also for organization of access to healthcare and allocation of healthcare resources in the national health systems. Our competence, the competence of that at the European level is quite limited. So basically, we rely very much on actually policies of member states to ensure that the relevant resources are there to ensure that the needs of the population are met. Nevertheless, we come up with some hopefully interesting activities which we are just putting in place, which are very much based on the bottom-up approach, and which invite actually also the initiative and some thinking of a very broad community of stakeholders and partners, including the relevant health authorities, but also healthcare professionals, stakeholders, social partners, NGOs, and other interested stakeholders to join certain efforts which should actually help us build more resilient health systems, to more resilient healthcare workforce, because indeed we cannot reach this objective of building more resilient health system without the central piece of the system, without helping the healthcare workers themselves. And unfortunately, the pandemic put very sharp lenses to various challenges and problems the healthcare workers face. That's why to build the resilience of healthcare workforce, we think that would require an action on multiple levels through, for example, more sophisticated healthcare workforce planning, through the increased investment in skills and skills mix innovations in combination with a sustained expansion of the healthcare workforce. But here we should not believe that exponential increase of the healthcare workforce would be a feasible solution and would solve all the problems we have and which the panelists mentioned already. We need to certainly increase the skills. They come very much to the fore in this crisis, to ensure that we can support the reorganization of healthcare services. We can, for example, achieve the real and effective shift to more preventive approach in healthcare, to increase the role of primary care, to ensure that we have task shifting, this teamwork, which was also mentioned today, that we also give due attention to the new professions and to the new career pathways in the healthcare sector. And on our side, I think it's a nice opportunity, or conference is a nice opportunity to update you a little bit on what we do at our level to support these efforts. So we have already up and running some projects, 5 projects, which are dedicated to finding policy solutions to the problems of medical deserts. So these areas which are underserved because there are not enough professionals in these areas, and that concerns very well as well pharmacists. And these projects are supported with the funding from our previous health program. So if you are interested, you can find it on our policy platform. You can follow the discussion which is there. There are some regular exchanges through seminars, webinars organized, and this is indeed one of these bottom-up initiatives where we find the interested stakeholders in member states who work together on various challenges like task shifting, retention of healthcare workers, and broadly medical deserts. Another important initiative is the Joint Action Heroes, which we are just setting up. This is the joint action which would aim at improving the tools, effective tools the member states have to better plan and forecast the healthcare workforce, including the skills, of course, of healthcare professionals. And what we would, our ambition would be to ensure that the tools we help to develop will put more focus on the demand of healthcare, because yes, there is a certain mismatch in skills, but also in staffing levels, because of the fact that the planning does not necessarily put enough emphasis on the demand. It puts a bit too much emphasis on the supply, and this is of course not enough. This action should officially be launched in autumn. We have already a proposal from the interested 18 countries, and we are working on actually putting it effectively into action. Another interesting initiative, which is quite fresh, is also our call for training initiatives, which was announced 3 weeks ago. and which is still open until the 23rd of May. So the interested professionals, organizations, but also non-clinical organizations representing non-clinical staff are have an opportunity to apply for some funds for initiatives which would basically target continuous education and training. We would hope to get a project of the European scope, so we invite the initiatives which call for training in at least 5 member states. Of course, this initiative is also open to the pharmacists because it's open to clinical and non-clinical staff. And yeah, I was listening to what Andrea said, to her suggestion, very valid suggestion that we should involve professionals, yeah, in education. They should have a right to say how they want the training to be developed, what should be the part of curricula. I fully agree, and indeed this initiative goes in this direction because we open it to also to the professionals organizations. So we hope that they would come up with interesting training proposals. And I would also like to stress that skills are a very central piece of the current Commission priorities. You might have heard or you might know that in 2020 the Commission set up Ptak for Skills, which is going to support resilient recovery and deliver on ambitious of digital and green transformation. So this comes very strong in our policies, and I'm happy also to tell you that we will have a partnership set up in the health area under this big initiative, because you can have initiatives in various sectors here. So you can engage stakeholders from various sectors, whether it's culture, automobile, or healthcare, to come together and to work together on making skills a real priority, so setting up a priority agenda and mobilizing efforts to provide more training initiatives. So I'm happy to announce that the project which was proposed under the Erasmus Plus call was successful, and we will in some time start setting up this initiative. So we will probably hear more about yes, the importance of skills in healthcare and how this is addressed in our policies. I could go on and on. I could also talk about national instruments which are there for member states to invest in skills, like the Recovery and Resilience Facility, like the European Social Fund Plus, like the Technical Support Initiative and Digital Skills in healthcare. But I think I will stop there, not to take too much time, and yeah, very happy to be here and finally connect to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these insightful news and opportunities. And I would like also to come back to something you said about the curricula and what could be changed to improve our education. And as we said, many of the speakers have also touched upon it, there are a lot of disparities in the curricula. And as one of the European Commission work on education, the European Strategy for Universities talks a little bit about a unified curriculum, or moving towards a unified curriculum. So I would like to ask you, Mara, do you think a unified curriculum will ensure faster improvements in the healthcare education?
Thank you, Chloe. Yes, I think it's one of the ways forward. I'm looking forward for the next panel and to understand a bit more about European strategy, and I read a bit about that. But I may share with you a the experience we had in the Train for Health project. So as I said, it was funded by the European Union, and it's a project to improve the competencies of students to support behavior change in persons that live with chronic disease. And as part of this project, we developed a competency framework that is interprofessional, and then we developed a curriculum which is European. And of course, the true European dimension of this curriculum, it depends on adoption and implementation, as George just mentioned. It's a very topical area, but we are still in a phase of development. And if you think about behavior change support, it's quite surprising that all health professionals are expected to support behavior change. And when you think about reimagining a relationship, as George mentioned, I think the first thing is a changing paradigm, because we don't change behavior of persons change their behavior, and we support them. But I think the key point here, and I'm just pointing out the gap that we are addressing as a project that has EU funding, is the fact that we are all expected as health professionals to support behavior change, but the training we received is either absent or patchy or not really aligned with behavioral science. And this is the gap, it's one of the gaps that we are addressing. And we are doing this, just building on what Andrzej said, in co-production with stakeholders. So we are involving academic educators and students, because we have to work in collaboration. And we have also to change the paradigm of developing things for students. No, we should develop things with students, because I think it makes a lot of sense for engagement. It makes a lot of sense to enhance learning. Anyway, my point here is, so we developed a curriculum which has a European scope, and the curriculum has learning outcomes that are aligned with the competency framework. It has a set of activities for learning, so you have a massive open online course, you have case studies, and you have a simulation software. And if you think of all the work we did, now we have to think about impact. And if we think about impact, yes, clearly, Chloe, I think it's the adoption of this joint program that makes sense. Because otherwise, you lose impact and you lose consistency, and you spend resources that are scarce in reinventing the wheel. So I'm very much so currently. So in the project, in the Train for Health project, the project will come to an end in August, and we're working with a range of stakeholders, both with an early adopters program and collaborations with stakeholders, just to make sure that the project has an impact that goes beyond its end. But definitely, going back to your question, I think ensuring that we have curriculums that are common across many European countries, and provided that the curriculum have been developed with a process of engagement and involvement, I think it makes an awful lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think mentioning co-creation of learning will resonate a lot with many students from the room, I hope. Now I want to go back to something that was mentioned a little bit before by Katarzyna, when you talked about healthcare shortages and professionals, because it is good to invest in skills, but if you don't have enough health professionals to work afterwards, then the issue is another one. I would like to ask you, Katarzyna, Ptak, what have you identified to be the cause of these shortages in health workers and in European countries? And seeing how it impacts the resilience of the European health workforce, should the response include more transnational cooperation, such as, for example, a unified curricula, rather than building national strategies? Can you hear us? Mrs. Ptak?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chloe, for this question. Yes, indeed, we have to address shortages in first instance, but as I mentioned already, the exponential increase of staff is rather not visible. It should be accompanied by other measures. But indeed, looking at shortages, it seems to be, of healthcare professionals, it seems to be a very structural problem of a very structural nature across the EU. Yes, unfortunately, the pandemic, after the initial mobilization of additional staff, caused further disruptions. As, for example, some professionals decided to suspend their activity or to, even in a worst case scenario, leave the profession. Despite yes, the certain increases of healthcare professionals in some years ago, dating some years ago, the demand and complexity of care is growing very quickly due to the aging of the population, of course, and growing burden of chronic diseases. That's why yeah, we need to be certainly more ambitious thinking of addressing these shortages. And I think that there is a very huge variation in challenges, because there is a huge variation in the size and composition of healthcare workforce across the EU member states. We have countries like Poland, for example, with a very low number of practicing doctors, and countries which do much better, like Austria. The same for example, practicing nurses, where Bulgaria is one of those member states where we have the lowest number of nurses per 1,000 population, and Finland, which is performing very well. And on top of this cross-country variation, there is also huge geographical disparities. So there are problems with retaining staff in certain less attractive areas, attractive for many reasons. And there is also, yes, there is also a good side actually of the pandemic, if one could say so. This is actually the acceleration in the use of digital health tools. This can, to some extent, of course, address problems, relieve health workers of certain pressure related to administrative procedures, but it can also add certain efficiency in treatment and following up patients. So there is certainly a huge potential of these technologies to be exploited. I think that one should also mention aging. When we look at the age structure of healthcare workforce, we see also certain worrying patterns in some member states. So that should certainly be taken into account, and this is indeed what is behind our thinking on the joint action heroes, where we want to take into account these various parameters which impact on the supply of healthcare professionals, and of course which is matched to the demand. There are also some member states which struggle, for example, with the dependence on foreign workers, and actually the pandemic puts it also to the fore, like Luxembourg or Malta. That may increase certain fragility of such member states in the moments of shocks. I should also mention probably migrations. Yes, they put at a disadvantage certain member states like the Baltics or Central Europe. So this may be indeed a challenge, not only the opportunity for healthcare professionals. One should really look at the country-specific context, at the differences in health systems, differences in care solutions. That matters very much when we think of the right composition of healthcare workforce. So there are various parameters which need to be taken into account. When it comes to the second part of your question, yes, indeed, as I said, there is certain room for the EU action indeed, and we are trying to exploit it through the actions I mentioned. But here there is again this quite strict share of competences between the national level and the EU level. Of course, when thinking of the crisis response, we provided certain support to healthcare professionals to train to become operational in the intensive care units, for example. So there is a success of the emergency support instrument action, the so-called C19 space program, showing that indeed there is certainly big added value at the EU level. Of course, the actions which I mentioned, they should indeed contribute, they should provide the EU added value, they should certainly support the member states' efforts. I also would like to mention the role of the European semester, because this is indeed the mechanism through which we encourage the efforts of member states to work on certain policies which have a macroeconomic impact, and healthcare is part of it. And just to tell you that this is really a negotiation process. To get, for example, a country-specific recommendation in the health area in the previous years before the pandemic, it was really a tough negotiation process, because other policies came as priorities before healthcare. But in 2020, we managed to get country-specific recommendations for all the member states. And actually, 15 of those country-specific recommendations called for efforts to address the shortages of healthcare professionals. Also, there were references to skills in the package which was issued to member states. So this is also one of those mechanisms which we use, and this is a very important. This is not an abstract thing. This is the mechanism which allows us to monitor the progress of member states, to discuss with them, and also to help them through funding mechanisms, like, for example, the Recovery and Resilience Facility or the Cohesion Fund. They should actually be very much linked to these country-specific recommendations, to the semester process. So there are various mechanisms which we did, which we try to mobilize, to support the national efforts. But yeah, this is where we are with the share of competences, and we try to do our best to provide for some bottom-up actions, as I mentioned, and to also mobilize our macroeconomic governance policy mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these insights on the more European and national mechanisms. Now I would like to turn to Andrea. From a student's perspective, but also more on the university level, what do you believe are some criteria and some factors that enhance shortages in health professions?
Thank you so much, Chloe. So my first big point would be related to the accessibility of studies, because as most of you probably know, when you want to join pharmaceutical university, there is a selection criteria. In most of the countries, there is an exam that you have to take either in the beginning of the first year or at the end of the first year in some other countries, while in a smaller number of countries there is no exam, but the selection is made based on the high school grades or baccalaureate grade and your basic dossier. However, the acceptance rate is very low in certain countries. For example, in France, around 8 to 15% of people that actually want to follow pharmaceutical studies are actually enrolled, while in other countries the acceptance rate is way bigger, which create this kind of heterogeneity around Europe, which actually also impacts the repartition of health workers across countries, leading to the shortages that we see today. Because obviously if the acceptance rate is lower, then the number of professionals that finish the university will be lower, and then when they will get on the job market, the number of professionals might not be enough. While in other countries there might be too many and there might not be enough work spots for all of them. And we believe that selection process should be more equal across Europe, but should also be more fair for students, providing all of them equal chances to follow the pharmaceutical studies if this is what they wish for. For example, a good way to do this is for universities to provide free tutoring classes for those who would like to follow their studies, or to include in the application dossier more extracurricular activities, or take into account the motivation of students, which will also show how motivated they will actually be to study for all the years to come. Also, what we observed is that some students, quite a high number actually, are dropping after their first year due to the fact that the pharmaceutical studies were not what they expected them to be. So maybe it would be good to also raise awareness on what actually being a pharmacist is, what you will be studying during your university, because this way they will take the spot of someone that might actually be interested or more motivated to follow the studies and might actually finish them as well. Also, it's good to keep in mind that the number of students that can be enrolled can vary with the requirements of the job market. We believe that this number shouldn't be the same every year, but it can be assessed based on how many actual spots are in the job market and how big the need is. For example, if there are shortages in a certain country, then more spots can be made available for those who want to enroll in the first year. Obviously it will take years to overcome the shortages, but this might be a solution. And my second point is regarding the mental health, because this is also an important aspect to be kept in mind, and might influence the shortage of the healthcare workers as well. Because as we all know, studying pharmacy is not easy, and a very high number of students mentioned that they experience mental health issues while they are studying. Most of them mentioned that they are actually experiencing them starting with the first year of studies or with the exam, due to the difficulty of the exam or the unequal selection criteria or very, very low number of students being admitted, which is obviously very stressful for someone. In the Health at Glance Europe 2020 report, it is stated that the risk of developing mental health condition is particularly seen among young people. And they also mentioned that approximately 20% of mental health conditions worldwide are seen in youth, with suicide being appointed as the second leading cause of death among those aged between 15 and 29 years old, which is basically the target age of the pharmaceutical student. And we also created our own mental health survey last year in EPSA, and the pharmaceutical students across Europe, I think we had more than 2,000 answers to that survey, and almost half of them said that they are they're experiencing mental health issues during their studies. Unfortunately, those are not really addressed by the universities, with only 12% of the students considering that their mental health is being taken into account by the university. And actually only 10% of them state that the facilities available at the universities are actually sufficient. And we believe that whether this is the cause of insufficient communication or means in the human resources of the universities, we would really like to ask for collaboration between universities and students to work on avoiding mental health issues across young people and obviously across pharmaceutical students. And we would like the universities to be more actively involved in the promotion, protection, and care of students' mental health. Because pharmaceutical students are the healthcare professionals of tomorrow, and their mental health is particularly important because it will define their ability to develop their own human and societal skills, but also to take care of their patients. And this will ultimately impact the European health sector for the year to come, and will also maybe decrease the risk of shortages of healthcare professionals across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And those are important numbers and important topics that we'll address later on in the second panel as well. Now I would like to turn to Josef in order to conclude. So I will ask the question I asked you a bit earlier. So do you believe, after listening to the discussion, do you believe we are slowly moving toward a European strategy for effective and sustainable healthcare workforce planning?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we absolutely are. Like, we've seen a lot of consistent approaches coming together. The comments earlier today about looking at a heterogeneous qualification system, you can see what that tells you is nations across Europe are saying, yeah, look, we have common problems, we have common challenges, we do need to cooperate. We see that reflected through the European Commission with their pact for skills. We see, I mean, Katja talked earlier about the EU approach, so I'm not going to repeat that because obviously I work for an NGO, but I'll tell you from our perspective, what we see is there's a lot of calls for action on education and training. So in that way, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to think much about it. There's so much being called for. So many, I mean, Katja mentioned that there's this open call now on the workforce. She talked about that they'll soon announce one on a strategy for the workforce. So everything's there, everything's aligned. And I think therefore if you are all graduating, like, have you graduated yet? You're about to? No, you're not yet. Okay, so you're about to. So you're going to start in the workforce at really, I think, an incredibly interesting time to be entering. And I think you will feel this need for learning. Like, just hearing you talk about the need of mental health, hearing all of these things that are coming up for me, from my observations, are newly aligned, are bringing together all the things that we've reflected. So yes, it's clear that that's happening. I do want to add one thing though that I think is really important, and that is that we talked about the cost of aging. That was mentioned a couple of times, and how aging is a major issue. But actually what's interesting is we were involved in another project a bit earlier called 2REACH, and 2REACH was looking at how do you transfer innovations in the healthcare system. And it learned something real interesting, which is that aging is expensive and is perceived as being one of our most expensive problems, but it doesn't come close to the cost of how poorly we innovate, we transfer innovations. So one country learns something, great practice, they try to transfer it to another country, it doesn't work. We lose billions of euros in this inefficiency. And so actually the fact that you all are here together, the fact that we're having these skills aligning, the fact that we're thinking collectively, that's going to make the biggest impact. And this is what I think things like, well, from my perspective, what I'd like to see, things like the Pact for Skills and any strategies on aligning training and qualifications, which as I've said, are coming together. If we can make an impact on the successfully transferring innovations, then we're winning.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all our speakers for the panel discussion. It was very insightful, and I think will work very well with the second panel discussion, which we will follow in a few minutes. Thank you. Everyone, I think now we will be able to move to the second panel discussion, which focuses more on the implementation of the European strategy for universities. It's a topic that we touched upon a little in the first this roundtable discussion, but here we will have 5 panelists who will present their perspective on the implementation of the strategy, but also student panelists who will give their direct experience and what they have reported within their countries. So this would give an important ground for great discussion. OECD's Public Government's Directorate and has been focusing on issues of youth empowerment since 2017. And the OECD, as part of it, has just released a paper, Youth and COVID-19 Response, Recovery and Resilience. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Warm welcome to everyone, and thanks to European Pharmaceutical Students Association for this excellent event and also invitation. I will be joining virtually, and I hope to be part of the events also physically in the future. So as Chloe mentioned, OECD works on the issues of youth empowerment and intergenerational justice, and I'm representing the Public Governance Directorate, and I would like to share with you some findings from our recent paper, which looks at the issue that were also discussed today, mental health, education, employment, and looks at the role of youth organizations. So before starting the findings, let me also thank you for your participation in the OECD survey. We received your replies and also very good initiatives we implemented during the pandemic to support those in need, and that really helped us also formulate these findings and recommendations. Without further ado, I would like to continue with the findings. I was intending to share a presentation. I don't know if this is still possible, or would you advise me to rather continue at the moment?
You are able to share your screen if you like.
I can try. I think that doesn't allow me to share on the post, but I can start, and in the meantime, if it is possible for you to display, I can also show you some graphs about the findings. Yes, as you mentioned, OECD's policy paper looks at data coming from the youth organizations themselves. We collected data from youth organizations from 7 countries, and we asked them questions about where this health pandemic affected their lives, and how this affected their views on also trust in government, democracy, broader implications of the pandemic. And when we asked them the 3 concerns regarding the effects of the young people, youth organizations mentioned their greatest worries about the impact of COVID-19 on their mental health. More than 83% of participants mentioned that the biggest impact of the pandemic was on their mental health. And then education by 64%, employment, and followed by family and friendship relations. And they also expressed concern about limitation of individual freedoms. And this is a survey we conducted a couple of months ago, so it shows us that despite lessening some of the COVID-19 measures, young people are still hit hard by the effects of the pandemic on their mental well-being. And when we look at the trends over time, when we compare data with 2020, beginning of the pandemic, we see actually that concerns in the areas of mental health, education, and family and friendship relations have been growing in the meantime. And concerns about accessing and maintaining employment remain at a very high level. So this shows the long-lasting scars that pandemic might have in young people and their future prospects. We also asked youth organizations what are their concerns in the long term. And they mentioned that they are concerned about intergenerational divide between other generations and their generations about accessing to different opportunities. And they were also mentioning that they feel that most of the measures that were adopted during the pandemic and also for recovery, they had very little say in shaping these responses as organizations. And we see that only 15% of respondents are satisfied with the lockdown and confinement measures, and they feel their views as young people were incorporated in designing them. And only 25% thinks financial schemes to mitigate the impacts on job and income loss were reflecting the views and needs of young people. And they also think majority of respondents think governments cannot adequately consider young people's views when prioritizing age groups in the vaccination campaigns. So in light of these findings, we were looking at how they affect more broadly young people's relationship with public institutions, such as their trust in public institutions or government. And we found that these concerns have an impact on their trust and the ability, their confidence in their governments to handle and recover from future crises. So we see that 38% of youth organizations reported a decrease in their trust in government since the start of the pandemic. And then around 1 in 3 respondents said their members' satisfaction with democracy has decreased since the beginning of the crisis. Now I'm seeing that also the presentation. Thank you so much. Maybe next slide, I can just show you the finding. This is the upcoming paper that will be launched actually next week, which we will be happy to share with you. And this is the finding that I told you about, impacts on mental health, education, and employment. Able to see how young people were reporting their worries about the mental health impacts. I'm no longer able to see the presentation, but if you allow me, I can maybe continue or wait. I am perfect. Now I can see. Yes, this is about worries that I mentioned to you. And then next slide, please. Should I wait or what would be better?
I think you can continue while
Okay, sure, no worries. So I was mentioning the implications of these worries on youth organizations, trust and satisfaction with democracy, which are of course very worrying trends, because as we know, young people at transition to adulthood, their interactions and experiences at this stage of life has really long-lasting impacts. And an external study showed that young people who experience crisis in their transition to adulthood, which we consider age 15 to 26 or 29, have later in government, and they are less likely to exercise their democratic rights like voting. So this is really a worrying trend that we see, and we also see that there were some positive aspects that youth organizations expressed more satisfaction. For example, majority, more than 50%, expressed satisfaction with the use of scientific evidence during the pandemic and how their governments communicated on the risk of the pandemic with their citizens. So these are good lessons learned that also shows us that transparency of evidence, communication and involving youth organizations, civil society in responding to the pandemic, but also while recovering, are very important for youth organizations and their members to strengthen their relationship with public institutions, feel that their needs and concerns are addressed adequately, because as these findings show, they have been hit hard, especially when it comes to mental health, education and employment, as you were highlighting today. So with this, I think I can finalize my introduction. And as I mentioned, we will be very pleased to see you among us for the launch of this paper officially on Monday. And we will be happy to share it to the invite to the EPSA. I would like to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm also available to answer it.
Our next speaker will be Mrs. Liliane Azurparty, who is the president of the European Association of Faculties Pharmacy. Thank you for joining us.
So good afternoon. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, and it's a pleasure to be with EPSA, the organization and discussion of pertinent topics. I don't know whether I can share the slide or... Yes, I can do it from my end apparently, so I will be doing it just now. Can you see the slides very well? Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Okay, so I thought, I think in the previous panel and the previous speakers have already touched on the most important aspects that are very relevant into getting now a strategy for the universities. I will be mostly focusing on the experience that we are particularly focusing on today, that is having a strategy which is aligned with the EU, with being part of, with the strength of being a European community in terms of pharmacy education. And before we move on into looking at this strategy and how we can implement it, I have been asked to also reflect on how the lessons learned from the pandemic actually could enrich us into implementing the upcoming strategy that has been rolled out also for discussion from the European Commission. And here I highlighted the 4 aspects that have been very relevant to education at a higher education level, and especially in pharmacy. First of all, we have learned, and it has already been mentioned earlier, how to manage academic uncertainty, both from the provider end and the faculty, but very, very importantly also from the pharmacy students' experience. And I believe that this has shown us the importance that, because of the uncertainty that we have to navigate together, the 2 lessons that have been learned for the next pillars for the strategy are the emphasis on teamwork and the emphasis on crisis management and preparedness. The other the second aspect was the economic implications. We all know that the economic implications of handling a pandemic and both the negative impact because of the delay in activities that have happened, and also from a pharmaceutical point of view, the economics in terms of having to spend monies and dedicate budgets related to an increased use of PPEs, an increased use of some biological drugs that are now being used also for the COVID therapy. So the reflection here is that the pharmacoeconomic aspect in pharmacy needs to be given center attention also in our preparedness of our students. And the other 2 pillars were the social interactions. We have seen how social interactions unfortunately were truncated, how these affected some of our students, and how we as a student and university community at the same time tried to support society to maintain social interactions. For example, we have had examples where pharmacy students in Europe from European schools of pharmacy participated in ensuring that vulnerable patients could access pharmaceutical services. And so in a way we were hit, we had our community which was hit with mental health issues. Maybe we have become more sensitive to the needs of the student and university community from that aspect, but we have also been responsive, and therefore we need to include in our preparedness the importance to prepare to become supporters for this community in terms of the social interactions. And the 4th aspect was the publications analysis. I have never seen such an extensive inundation of publication and science as the scientific community scrambled to understand the SARS SARS-CoV-2 virus, and to understand how to get the appropriate commitment towards the pandemic, including, for example, the development of vaccines with new technology. So, but we have also seen examples where publications were coming through as preprints and then receiving discussions, criticism, and updating. So the need for our preparedness, for our education to prepare graduates to be able to critically analyze publications, the science that is out there. And I think these were the four main areas that we have actually we can take with us into preparing for the aligning the next strategy. And in the next slide, I have the four pillars, which I believe are very important in capturing within a strategy for pharmacy education in Europe, where we need to focus on maintaining the science as the evidence base of our curricula. In a way, in Europe, we are, maybe we don't consider ourselves as lucky as much as we are, really, because we do have a common framework of education that is stipulated in the directive. On the other hand, this directive has been with us for quite a number of years. And in fact, as educators, as pharmacy educators, we do believe, together we have had also discussions with EPSA, we do believe that there are areas of updating. And therefore we do need to push that this science is made relevant, for example, by including the science of pharmacoeconomics, which we've already mentioned, by including the science of pharmaceutical regulatory sciences. Earlier, the speaker was referring to the safety parameters that are included in a medicinal pack. So regulatory sciences has become also a very key important aspect for pharmacy education to prepare our graduates to ensure safe and quality effective medicines. The resilience both of the profession, the practice itself has been dealt with at length from the earlier speakers, and the importance to empower our people and capacity build to provide future-proof skills. We should be moving away from the topics, but we should be building capacity in our graduates that provides the competencies and the skills that then can be implemented in the pharmacy environment to promote further research and innovation that will transform further the profession. So I take you back to the position paper issued by the European Association of Faculties of Pharmacy, which was extensively discussed by our stakeholders and partners, including organizations from different areas of pharmacy as well as EPSA. And the four pillars identified in this position paper are highlighted in the four boxes, and now merging what we are seeing in the university strategies, what we have learned from the COVID pandemic, we can see that we should be now emphasizing on merging science that we have seen being relevant as we were fighting this pandemic and as we prepare for other issues, particularly related, for example, to resistance, antibiotic resistance in infectious diseases. So the vaccinology, we have seen that it needs to be the science of vaccinology, and discussing administration of vaccines and preparedness has gained a lot of importance again. The medical device environment and the ecosystem. The teaching method, we have learned that we could incorporate some aspects of remote learning whilst not jeopardizing the social interaction which is needed for the mental well-being of our students, and also to ascertain that there is the competence development which is humane. We have a patient, we have society, and therefore we should be striving to kick the right balance in ensuring, in getting to these hybrid models. The team player, I can never overemphasize the importance of team player and developing this team player competence within the student group, together with the crisis management, which we've seen is really important when things become unexpected, and this is something that in pharmacy and at a university level is receiving importance. And finally, the preparedness of the pharmaceutical workforce for innovation. And we've heard a lot the very relevant digital health environment. So the preparedness not only for the digital world, but also now as we are moving into actually providing digital health services through digital therapeutics, through connecting with our patients digitally. So the preparedness has to get into this aspect as well. And so finally, as the EAFP, we are actually in May this year, we are looking forward to have our 2022 live annual conference, which will be held in Malta, and we are now moving to look at, we believe that the importance of the focus in the strategy needs to be that rather than the curriculum, the topics, what we are learning, what we are teaching, we should be looking at competencies that are going to translate into transferable skills for our pharmaceutical workforce to become people-centered whilst embracing the innovations that we are seeing through digitalization and the importance of building bridges. I think these are, and we strongly believe that sitting down and establishing these competencies, core competencies, which are highlighting these transferable skills, is going to be a way to achieve the strategy for universities from a pharmaceutical education perspective. Thank you again for being part of this panel, and I really enjoyed the session throughout. So thank you again, and congratulations to EPSA.
Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation, and I think this one will complement very well our next speaker, who is Mrs. Kinga Sui, who is from the European Commission, Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, to present to us European strategy for universities from the European Commission's perspective. Thank you very much.
Okay, now it's better. Thank you very much. I would like to speak about a more general issue about the European strategy for universities. In September 2020, the Commission presented a communication on achieving the European education area by 2025. It means that by 2025, we should have an area for education where students and education staff can move freely, where diplomas, qualifications are recognized automatically, where the majority of students has a transnational experience during their higher education studies. So as a follow-up of that communication, we started to work on a specific strategy for universities. It has been published in January 2022, so very recently, and it is part of an education package, which started with a communication on a European approach for micro-credentials for lifelong learning and employability, and also a Council recommendation for learning for environmental sustainability, as well as a Council recommendation on building bridges for effective transnational cooperation. The three specific aspects that are specifically targeted for universities are these short learning options, so micro-credentials, then the green aspect, so for environmental sustainability, and also for effective transnational cooperation, how universities can cooperate more effectively, more freely, without obstacles. Currently, about 92% of universities face obstacles on the national level when they would like to start, for example, a joint program, or when they would like to apply a joint degree at the end of the study periods. The published strategy for universities has a shared European vision for all types of higher education institutions to adapt to changing conditions and cross all their missions. It also presents priority areas for transformation based on clear learning objectives. It also provides concrete actions at EU level to enable and support the sector, and presents synergies with actions at national level. There are 4 key objectives that are identified in the strategy. One is strengthen the European dimension in higher education and research, which focuses on bridging transnational cooperation to a higher level that contributes to culture of excellence and inclusion and a true European identity. The second key objective is to consolidate universities as lighthouses of our European way of life, covering aspects like strengthening quality and relevance for future-proof skills, foster diversity, inclusiveness and gender equality, and promote and protect European democratic values. The third key objective is to empower universities as key actors for change in the green and digital transition. So develop skills, competencies and technological innovation for the green and digital transition. And finally, the fourth is reinforce universities as drivers of Europe's global role and leadership. The strategy also proposes to continue and expand the European Universities Initiative. So we expect that by 2024, there will be 60 European universities alliances in Europe, with an indicative Erasmus Plus budget of 1.1 billion euros for the period of 2021-2027. This European Universities Initiative has been started in 2018. If you remember, with the speech of President Macron on speaking about setting up European universities for excellence and inclusion. Currently we have 41 alliances, and we are just in the finalization phase of the new call for European University Alliances. The second flagship initiative is to work towards a legal status for alliances of higher education institutions. Because based on the pilot call of European Universities Initiative, it is clear that sharing resources, hiring staff jointly, engaging students jointly would be a great help for them to achieve their ambitious objectives. So that's the second flagship initiative. The third one is to examine options and necessary steps towards a joint European degree, which we plan to pilot as of 2022 as a European degree label certificate, which is given to students to signal their transnational experience during their studies and the additional skills and competencies they acquired through transnational studies, especially at the European universities, but not exclusively, also in Erasmus Mundus, joint master's initiatives or Marie Curie actions. And the fourth flagship initiative is to scale up the European Student Card Initiative by starting deploying a unique European student identifier to all mobile students in 2022 and to all students in universities in Europe by mid-2024. This European Student Card Initiative, which is called a card, but it's actually not a card, it's an electronic exchange of student data, would greatly facilitate student exchange around Europe. These four flagship initiatives and the priorities of the strategy, what I have mentioned earlier, will be supported by different tools. For example, we propose to mobilize adequate financial support to higher education and research. So achieving inclusion and excellence requires appropriate funding for universities. So both in the multi-annual financial framework of the EU, the Next Generation EU, and other sources will be all mobilized to support this European strategy. Currently, we estimate that about 80 billion euros are dedicated to the sector throughout Europe from European funding sources. It's also important that this European level financial support is aligned with national financial support. So we are in contact with the national authorities and ministries to align the financial support to universities. We also propose to set up a European Higher Education Sector Observatory and to monitor the progress of the European strategy. This first will mean to align all the monitoring tools that the Commission already has and Member States already have to see what is the situation on the ground, how the sector changes, for example, according to the recent developments. But we propose to align and to make interoperable all this data we already collect both at Member States and at European level. And then we also work together with our colleague from the Research and Innovation Directorate General on synergies between the European education area, the European research area, and also the Bologna process, the European higher education area. To make all these aligned, fit for purpose and flexible. And finally, we also propose regular reporting on the development of the European education area and specifically on the actions of the European strategy for universities. So as I said, this strategy is accompanied with a Council recommendation on building bridges for higher education cooperation, facilitating transnational education activities, focusing on quality and recognition, developing a system of quality and recognition throughout Europe. Currently, we are in negotiation with the Member States on these draft Council recommendations, because as you know, education and the content and organization of education is Member State competence, so the EU is supporting and complementing these Member State actions. We expect that as soon as April, under the French presidency, these drafts will be adopted and we will have these new Council recommendations, and then we will start to work on the implementation with the sector and with the Member State authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation that we will go back to first we will have two, from France, who will present his findings on gender-based violence in university and healthcare settings.
Hello everyone. Before starting, I want to inform you that you can scan the QR code if you want to have the digital version of our press kit on sexual and gender-based violence. So my name is Theo, and I'm a 5th year French pharmacy student, and I'm currently the vice president in charge of international affairs in ANEP. So before moving on the survey, I will provide you some information about ANEP. So ANEP is a national association of pharmacy students of France. It gathers 23 student local associations and thus represents more than 30,000 pharmacy students in France. Our main goal is to bring the students' position and opinion to the highest level with the objective of promoting interprofessionality and the quality of care. ANEP represents the link between the Pharmaceutical Professional Board, the universities and institutions, and the students. Our national board is made up of 23 vice presidents from 12 different faculties. And now let's move on our survey. You have to know that in student world, sexual and gender-based violence tends to be minimized. The lack of data contributes to making this aggression untouchable, making higher education a breeding ground for violence. The idea of a survey on gender-based and sexual violence within our studies came after analyzing our 2021 well-being survey and reading some testimonials of conjugal violence during the lockdown. The survey was carried out from November 21 to December 21, following our roundtable on this topic on our General Assembly in November, and we actually collected more than 2,100 answers. Following this survey, a press kit was written to analyze the results. The results were publicly presented to the press, to political personalities, to all the deans of faculties, during the press conference organized by ANEP at the beginning of February. So I will provide you with some important figures of the survey. Pharmacy students were first asked about sexist remarks they had experienced in their academic environment, whether it occurred during their student life or on the faculty grounds. When asked this question, 49% of students surveyed said that they had been subjected to sexist remarks in their academic environment. It's almost 1 out of 2 students. Regarding sexual harassment, students were asked if they had ever experienced repeated unwanted sexual comments towards them. 41.7% of them say they have already suffered from it. 1 woman out of 2 and 1 man out of 5 have been subjected to this harassment during their university life. Of course, I cannot detail all the figures that you will find in the press kit, where we also detail the figures regarding internship and professional environment. We were wondering why students did not report these types of aggression, and we received some testimonials that some students are fear about the consequences, are ashamed and afraid to talk, and they are afraid that people will tell that they have no sense of humor. Actually, only 6% of students reported situations of sexist abuse and harassment, and 83% of them found that the process was not useful. The fight against sexual and gender-based violence in higher education must be articulated in 2 axes. the fight against the consequences and impact of violence on individuals, and the fight against the violence and raising awareness. So we made a call of action with 13 proposals that I provided you 3 examples of them. So communicate on existing reporting mechanism, democratize the procedure and work on their implementation in establishments where they do not exist yet. ANEP is committed to working on a real-time reporting system for serious situations during internship, and to raise awareness and train the students and associative network at the rate of 1 workshop on sexual and gender-based violence per General Assembly. The aim of this last proposal is to help student association to prevent such violence, but also teach them how to organize responsible events by reducing the risk as much as possible. No student should ever have to suffer of any kind of violence during their university studies, and through this survey, ANEP calls for mobilization of all actors in order to protect the students that are the future of our beautiful profession. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Theo. And next to complement Theo's presentation, we have Josef from APEF Portugal, who will present more data about mental health and how it's linked to pharmaceutical studies.
So, hi everyone. So firstly, I'll maybe introduce myself. So my name is Josef. I'm the current liaison secretary for APEF Portugal, and I'll be talking a little bit about mental health of students in higher education. This is a study conducted by our Portuguese National Health Students Forum, which is basically a forum that reunites some national associations of different health studies, like pharmacy, medical, nutrition, psychology, veterinary, nursing, and also dental students. And we were trying to focus on an important matter, and you may be asking why mental health. And that is basically because we noticed that in the last few years, a lot of our students were really having some serious issues regarding mental health, and we really thought that this was an imperative matter to actually call for action, for political action, and to have some changes to protect them. So we did a survey, and we could get 1,008 students to reply to it, and we just noticed that 36% of them say that they have already been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And this is serious. 36% is a lot of people. And we noticed that also from that 36%, from that group of people, 42% of them were diagnosed with anxiety, 17% of them were diagnosed with depression, and 26% were diagnosed with anxiety and depression, which is a really serious concern, as you might get. That means that more than 25% of our students that replied to the survey were diagnosed with anxiety, and that is a quarter of all the students. Okay, what do I have more to say? 54% of the students that were diagnosed before, they keep their diagnosis currently. They are still with a mental disorder and they couldn't recover from it. And 23% are not sure of if they still do. That led us to think that they are probably not being able to just follow up with their mental well-being status, and they are probably unable to actually have access to these kind of resources to keep on maybe just working on themselves and trying to get better from these issues. Also, we asked our students if they thought that this was related to their higher education studies, and we just got to know that 80% of them were developing these issues during their studies in higher education. And this is not at all something that we want to keep, so we really thought that this is the right time to ask for some action. So we also noticed that most of the students feel stressed on a daily basis in their normal studies, and that only 66 out of the 1,008 students feels to be enough resilient. They don't feel like they have the skills enough to just deal with stress on their daily lives. Out of 304,733 students that we have in our public higher education institutions, for them all, we just have 36 psychological support offices and 58 active psychologists. And as I'm showing you in this slide, so the Portuguese Psychological Society recommends a ratio of 1 psychologist per 500 students. And as you can see here, that means that we have like 58 active psychologists, and since it's supposed to have 1 per 500 students, we only have psychological support for 29,000 students, and we have 304,733. So that divided by 500, so we can get the number of psychologists that we might need to support all of them. We would need 609 psychologists, as you can see also in this graphic. So we have this number of psychologists, and we would need that much psychologists, and this is something that we also wanted to address. So what should we do? So we wrote some we wrote some calls for action. We wanted to reevaluate the number of psychologists available in our systems, so we could assure the functioning and implementation of more offices, and also to increase the communication within these means and these services between all of them. Also, we asked for some evaluation of the magnitude of these concerns in each faculty, while investigating factors that could be helping to develop these kind of mental issues, and also to encourage learning and working conditions, like really healthy learning and working conditions that promote a healthy living and a more healthy mental being. Also, we asked to increase the investment in mental health and mental health education, because we really believe that our students must have free access to any mental health support in a free way. Okay, so just to wrap things up, this was proposed by FNESH, which is the national forum that I was talking about, and its members associations, and also it was subscribed by 13 local health associations, and also directed to the Science, Technology and Higher Education Ministry, the Health Ministry, the Council of Deans of Portuguese Universities, the Coordinator Council of Polytechnic Higher Institutions, and the Directorate General for Higher Education, and also acknowledged by political parties and parliamentary seat, Directorate General for Health, National Network of Higher Education, and Psychological Support Services. This because we really believe that if we're getting to them with concrete data, we maybe can get some action, and that is the whole purpose of this survey. So now what we have to do more? Just keeping up on the results and keep evaluating how is the current status of our students and also of these network of support providers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Josef and Tim, for your presentations. We have prepared a short panel discussion before answering the questions you might have. So first, I have a question for both Liliane and Kinga. After the presentation of our students and the findings of the OECD, how do you think the European strategic universities will attend these needs within the focus areas that you have mentioned in your presentation, so meaning inclusiveness, mobility, etc.
Thank you very much. Actually, inclusiveness and support for students. It's something that has been on the agenda for several years. So this is something that has already been addressed by the European Higher Education area ministerial conferences repeatedly, but we still see that there is a lot to do on inclusion. This means that we need to have concrete actions, not only on European level, but we have to push our member states, and we have to convince the national ministries to do more on this respect. So we are proposing to have a framework for inclusion and equity in higher education. And we also propose that higher education institutions set quantitative voluntary targets for themselves, how they would like to address this issue, so how they would like to involve people with disadvantaged background and with fewer opportunities in higher education studies. Because we believe that this, the way higher education institutions should address this, we couldn't have a one model fits all approach, because each higher education institution has its own profile, and they should address these questions based on their specific profile. There's a big difference between higher education institution for engineers and for nursery instructors, for example. So they should look at this issue from their own specific perspective, but member states should support it and should provide the necessary tools and framework for higher education institutions. Of course, we are supporting this from the Erasmus+ program. So there are several partnership options and other support mechanisms available from the Erasmus+ program for that. And specifically for the Erasmus+ mobilities, this has been one of the main priorities for the new financial perspective. So from 2021 to 2027, inclusive mobility for the Erasmus+ program is something what all member states needs to focus on, and they will have to set up specific measures to support those students with less opportunities to participate also in international mobilities.
Thank you very much. And I think talking about specificities of all institutions, that is very true, as we saw for health students mostly. And I think this is also something that maybe Liliane will be able to resonate a lot about.
Yes, I think that the important aspect is that on a national and institutional level, and even on a sectorial level, we emphasize the education. I believe it always gets to educating and empowering the players to include, to ensure inclusiveness by creating societal awareness. Sometimes that is what is very much lacking if you look at higher education institutions, that the graduates, the students, the team are secluded, and they are not very much aware of the societal needs and awarenesses that are required, for example, to incorporate, to ensure equality of access to education and opportunities. And that all boils down to also educating the infrastructure. And therefore I echo this importance of educating and supporting and creating awareness to ensure equality and inclusiveness.
Thank you very much, Liliane. Now I would like to return the question to our student panelists. So Theo and Josue, When learning about the strategy, when you were listening also to the presentation of our speakers, do you as students feel connected to the strategy, and do you believe it will improve the experience of students?
Actually, French students definitely welcome the strategy, which shows that the Commission recognition of this topic as an essential starting point to address the needs of youth. We also appreciate that the opportunity to voice our position and opinion with the public consultation. But we strongly think that it's important and necessary to include and involve the students in the implementation process as well, and mainly the national representatives.
Yeah, actually, as Theo said, concrete implementation is necessary. We see that one of the main gaps between our vision and the strategy is the direct mentioning of mental health in our education, especially as healthcare students. Mental health is a big strain of our professional and personal development. As we saw in the COVID times, professional workers were only able to pay care to other people if they had their own cares being taken care of. This can be tackled through ensuring regular assessment for students' mental health in universities and bringing free access to mental health support also there.
Thank you very much for your answers. Now I will turn to the audience in order for you to be able to construct the dialogue as well. Would anyone have a question for our panelists on the European strategy for universities or any topic that has been discussed? Yes, in the back. Yes. We will get a microphone to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I would like to ask our dear panelist, Mrs. Kinga, since you mentioned in your speech something about the interoperability of data, and I've heard a lot of different ways to do it. What did you mean exactly by that? And could you please elaborate a little bit on that? Thank you.
So, is it working? You know that one of the main role of the European Commission on Education is to provide the necessary background for evidence-based policymaking. So we are supporting policymakers at the national level, but also at the European level and also higher education institutions to have the necessary information to make good policies and good decisions. And one of the main tools what we are using for that is European level data collection. So we are operating the European Tertiary Education Registry, for example, where about 5,000 European institutions' data are available in a comparable manner with an identifier for each university. So it's possible to see how many students are attending different institutions, how much funding they receive, whether they are private or public, etc. We are also operating a performance management tool called Rank, which collects data about the regional engagement of universities, research data, so how well they perform on survey tools where we collect comparative information on the student's social situation, for example. It's called Eurostudent, and currently it collects information from 26 European countries on students' well-being and inclusion at higher education institutions. And we have recently started a new data collection, European comparison on graduates. So how graduates are performing in the labor market, how their higher education experience affected their life after university. Many member states already doing grade tracking. In several universities there is data collection on how their graduates are doing, but it's very important to see that also on a comparative manner in Europe. So these are just some of the tools. We have much more. We have DECA, for example, which is quality assurance registry, collecting quality assurance reports from different universities. What we are currently doing in the framework of this strategy is to make these tools interoperable so that we can connect the different data that we have. For example, this way we will be able to see trends and we will be able to decrease the reporting burden also for institutions, so we don't have to report the same thing twice. But we can also have information, for example, on what's the difference between the student well-being at different types of institutions, or how the labor market receives graduates from different subjects, for example. So it will increase significantly what we will be able to say about Europe and the European situation, higher education solutions. I hope that's clear.
Yes, thanks so much. Thank you very much. Is there any other question in the room? Yes? Yes, it's good.
Hi, so I'm from University College London, England, and so it is an interesting topic that we talk about interdisciplinary stuff. So this question will be actually for all the panelists. So we talked about that the interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach of education or treating patients about long-term diseases like cardiovascular disease, like high blood pressure and stuff like that, where we can be seeing pharmacists working with doctors, nurses, clinicians, and even non-health workers like social workers or administrators. So my question is, if we need to push this as a European-wide approach, how do we engage different sectors, especially different countries have different social care, health system, and we have a huge mobility of people moving across border amongst Europe and the EU in particular. My second question will be more about education, where even with an EU-based policy change or standardization framework of how we teach the future pharmacists, there is the diversity of practice, different colloquial best practice, and different and local implementation challenges in Europe. And how will this interdisciplinary education across this whole Europe be implemented or act on surpassing these challenges? I think that as student, this question is also for everybody now, because now if we teach students about interdisciplinary studies, then we may get very overwhelmed, because we need to remember the drug, dosage, and etc. You know what I mean? And if we learn additional stuff like let's say how the healthcare work in different countries, what is the ideal ethic model, stuff like that, then as students what can we do to help students to not only learn effectively but also how to do well mentally in a mental state. So thank you. I know there's a bunch of questions, but thank you.
thank you for your questions. Which one of the panelists would like to answer? Does anyone want to go first?
I could share some reflections if you feel it's appropriate.
Yes, of course, please.
Okay, so this I think that yes, it comes at the end of this very productive session, but I believe that it is a very highly relevant query that's coming up our way at the end of this session, because I think that as I emphasized earlier, that the importance of the teamwork is very important, and how we develop this skill in students is critical. The answer to the question is it's a $1 million question, so we cannot give, it's very difficult at this stage to give a model of what would be the best model to use. But there are some experiences that have now gained ground, that rather than teaching interprofessional education and care, I think it's the experience. So I believe that in a EU strategy or mandate for healthcare professional educations, we should be seeing the competence of interprofessional practice. That would be what we should be targeting to achieve. And how can you give this interprofessional education practice without overwhelming? Because as has rightly been said, we are always discussing what we can add to the curriculum and to the studies, but we are barely any time discussing what we should remove. So we have to be realistic in this. And therefore, I think that yes, IPE, interprofessional experiences, have to be put center front by using teaching models that expose that experience. So for example, in my university and a couple of other universities already in Europe, you see that, for example, you have patient cases where they are led by different healthcare professionals. So the students are meeting other students in nursing, in medicine, and discussing the patient case with a team which is led by a pharmacist and a prescriber. So you know, and in that way, as a student, you are gaining. In fact, we did also some research in this, and we measured what is the student taking home. You are the student is taking home what the other professional is contributing, what you can contribute in that professional mix. So I believe yes, this is a very good point that interprofessional care and practice has to be started in at a university level education, so that we support better interprofessional practice in our healthcare systems, which is a way to reduce errors and to improve patient experiences. So and how can we do it? By championing small models of getting students together in these practice sites.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for this question. I think it opens up a lot of discussion that I hope we'll be able to touch upon in another conference, another time. We have time for one last question, if a student would have one. Yes?
Hi, it's been a very quick one. I'm from Erasmus Student Network and seeing a big gap between students of medicine, all the scientific faculties not going on Erasmus. I'm really curious, like, what's the biggest challenge? Like, what's actually stopping you on going, and what would you expect from universities and other institutions to encourage the mobility?
Thank you very much. Do you address your question to the student panel?
Actually, I can tell you about my own experience because I did an Erasmus 2 years ago, and in France, between the 23 faculties, we have a huge gap between the destination. For example, I know that one faculty there is zero possibility of going on an Erasmus. Also, we have a lot of lack of communication between the administrative staff and students. Also, we have a lot of lack of recognition between our grades. For example, I still don't have any grades for my Erasmus year, and I also think there is some financial obstacles for students to go on Erasmus.
For me personally, I would say that the main difficulties would be to have the communication between the administrative departments as well, because at least from my personal experience of the things that I can get in my local university, it's that it's really hard to just have the same subjects in the country you're going on Erasmus to and in your home country, and then you'll just have a lot of subjects behind that you have to do like in one more year or with so much more effort, and that is really hardening things up for people to go in Erasmus experience other than, for example, their internship in the last year.
Thank you very much. Maybe if I also may add on the Erasmus experience. From the European side, the Erasmus Plus program has a significantly higher budget for this time. It's almost doubled for now than it was previously. So we really expect that there will be more mobilities. There are also all kinds of changes in the regulation for Erasmus Plus mobility, so that we can open up to those who were previously not involved in mobility. Like, for example, we more and more also accept blended mobility, where students don't go for such a long period physically abroad, but also continues to cooperate with professors and students from another university. Parallel to that, we also work on easing the university burden, but I have also mentioned in my presentation the European Student Card Initiative is actually something that will significantly improve the administration between the different universities for all mobility options. It's very interesting what you say about recognition, because this is something what we are currently working on a lot with member states. So we have a currency recommendation on automatic recognition for study periods abroad from 2018, and we are currently evaluating the implementation of that. And one of the bases of this evaluation is the student survey, what you have to fill out at the end of your Erasmus experience. So it's very important that you put in all these difficulties what you face with the recognition of your study periods. It's actually the obligation of all universities accepted in the Erasmus Plus program to recognize the Erasmus experience after. So there should be an agreement before going on mobility, and when you go back, you have to have those experiences recognized by your universities. If the university doesn't do it, then it's violating the Erasmus Charter for higher education, which we will monitor much more seriously now than we were doing it before, because it's a voluntary commitment, but when you do the commitment afterwards, you have to honor that commitment. Thank you very much for this feedback, and we can stay in touch with the commission side. Really focus on
Thank you very much, and it's also very nice to see that we circle back to Thank you all. Thank you all of our speakers online and live for this interesting panel. And I will move on to closing this event in order to move to the second part of our event, the networking cocktail that we will see later on. This was a very interesting event. We touched upon a lot of topics. We touched upon mobility, we talked about mental health, we talked about skills, upskilling, but also preparedness in times of crisis. And I think what was the most interesting part, and I think the most encouraging one, is the fact that we see that there is a willingness from all sides, so from the institutions, from the professors, from the students' side, from the European institutions, to collectively move towards better upskilling, but also evaluation of our current state in terms of education and skills for pharmaceutical studies, but also to open our eyes towards more worrying things such as the mental health of pharmaceutical students and health students in general, which is also a big part of education and which can also change a lot. So thank you all to all of our speakers and for all of the students for your participation. And now I welcome you all to move in the other room and have a nice